Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Happy Hour with the Maestro, brought to you live in living color from the North Charleston Performing Arts Center. Not really, but it looks like that because this is actually our Performing Arts Center. And the good news is, and I cannot think of better news than this, we're going to be back on November 7th. We are presenting a new concept, a new group that'll be part of the North Charleston POPS family. That is the North Charleston POPS Brass. We're going to do a concert on stage with social distancing featuring brass and percussion. It'll be patriotic, it'll be marches. We have a salute to veterans. We're going to feature a couple of our players. It's just going to be upbeat, fun, exciting, thrilling, and we will be having tickets available for a limited number of people who will again be social distanced in the pack. We'll make sure that you will be safe and that you will have a blast. So, first of all, of course, we have a beverage. A lot of people say, Maestro, you don't usually drink beer. Well, tonight I am. Most people who know me know I'm on a gluten-free diet, so I'm having a lovely gluten-free beer. It is called Omission. It is made up in Portland, Oregon, and it tastes just like regular beer, but it doesn't have any gluten in it. So, wonderful. And I'm enjoying it very much. I'll have to have another sip just to make sure it tastes the way I think it's supposed to taste, and it does. Great. Well, first of all, let's thank our sponsors. First, we have Maestro Wines, and I want to thank everyone who's been supportive, and there have been so many of you in the audience that have been purchasing wines from Scout and Cellar, this wonderful company that I represent as an executive consultant. Organic, biodynamic wines, really good for you. Well, of course, they have alcohol, but they are the most pure wines you can purchase. And if you want more information about them, please email me or call or text, and I'll be happy to give you more. Of course, our season sponsor, Boeing and its associates, and we're thrilled that Boeing is consolidating here in the Low Country. That is wonderful news for this economy. We're thrilled to hear that. South Carolina Arts Commission and the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation. We have a wonderful, wonderful guest, someone who's a dear friend of mine who I've known for many, many years, and I absolutely adore. And he is one of the most kind and generous and talented people I have ever met. Please welcome to Happy Hour with the Maestro, Tom Pandolfi.
Maestro
Hey,
Nick.
Tom. Hey, salute.
Hello.
Now, you have to tell us about your beverage, because I already know you already gave it away, but I want you to tell me what it is.
Well, you and I both know where this came from, and we're going to now share this with the audience. This is cognac from Moldova, specifically Tiraspol, Transnistria, Moldova, which is a little-known Eastern European country.
Oh, yeah.
Ukraine, near Romania, and this particular section of Moldova is exclusively Russian-speaking, and they are known for this beverage right here.
And it's a lovely beverage, I will say.
It
it's
is
not as easy to get in this country, though, as I recall from having been there myself, and we'll talk about our visits to Moldova. But
right.
It's great. You know, they make great wine, and they make great brandy. I guess you can't really call it cognac because it's not from France, but it's great.
Indeed, and it's hitting the spot right now, I've got to say.
I'm sure it is, just like this beer is.
And thank you for that wonderful introduction. Very kind. No, and you know the feeling is entirely mutual.
Oh, well, you're very kind, and I'm just being sincere, as you know, because we've had a blast together, and we've performed so many times, and we'll talk a little bit in a moment about all the things we've done, but let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your journey from, beginning the piano as a young man and how you got where you are today, educationally and otherwise, and all that.
Well, first of all, I grew up, as most musicians, hearing music as early as I can remember. My parents were avid classical music lovers. My dad was a really wonderful amateur pianist. And he actually was constantly playing LPs in the house, classical radio station, took me to concerts as a young boy. And every time there was a piano piece, I mean, I always loved all kinds of music, you know, orchestral, violin, cello, voice. But every time there was a piano piece that would come on, I would get especially excited. And for whatever reason, as a young kid of 4 or 5 years old, I'd run to the upper register of the piano, and I would try to tinkle along with that, with whatever I was hearing. And what I'm told is that rhythmically and harmonically, even though I had no idea what I was doing at that point, it would fit. And so that's when my dad said, well, I think we should start you on lessons. And I wanted to do it. And I immediately fell in love with it. And by the time I was, 10 years old or so, I was already publicly performing. And then probably about a year after that, I knew inside me that this is what I wanted to do. This was my dream, about someday becoming touring.
Isn't it great? Isn't it great when people find that out early? And, it's funny because with me, my dad was an influence too, even though he wasn't a musician. He used to listen to opera. And so I would hear that around the house. And my mother, who's still alive, is a pianist and harpist. So I heard it too. And that was a real motivator for me. So when we get early on knowing that that's what we want to do, I was a little older than when you decided you wanted to be a musician. I think I was about 13 or 14, but it's a great feeling, and it kind of helps you with the drive that you need.
Oh, indeed.
It happened. So tell us what happened next after you figured that out at 10 or 11.
After I figured that out, my dad figured that he had taken me as far as he could take me. And my parents sought out a really good teacher who really I was with all the way from that age until I went to Juilliard. And she was one of the, sort of typical Eastern European kind of taskmasters, like right. You in like when you see Olympics in training or, some musician.
Yeah, sure.
And she was very strict, and she was from Poland and had come over on scholarship as a young girl to study at Curtis under Rudolf Serkin. And so, I felt very grateful to have that kind of training. First to have the inspiration from my parents and the encouragement, and then to be with a really fine teacher up until the point where I went to Juilliard.
Yeah, and it's amazing when you have those kind of people too. When you think about the line of tradition that goes back to somebody like Rudolf Serkin, I mean, that guy was a titan, a genius. Really.
One of the towering figures of 20th
Oh, yeah.
century.
Absolutely. Unbelievable. So, okay, so then Juilliard School in New York City, one of the finest music schools in the world, very high pressure place, very difficult to get into. That's quite a credit to you to get into a place like that and to be able to study there. So what happened at that point?
Well, at that point, I enrolled in the class of Sasha Gordoninsky, who was pretty up in years in those days. And he was out of the old Russian tradition, Joseph Levine, that kind of amazing sort of golden age pianism. And so I studied with him for a couple years, and then he fell ill. Then I also studied with Adele Marcus, who was under that same Levine tradition. Actually, Marcus, it was an interesting combination because she had the Levine Russian tradition, but then she also had the Schnabel Germanic tradition. So it was a really wonderful combination. And she was quite the character. Anybody that you ever speak to who studied with Adele Marcus can tell you lots of stories. But she was a wonderful inspiration. And then unfortunately, her health started to decline. And then I began to play for Gyorgy Sandor, who was one of the pupils of Bela Bartok. So a really nice combination of training, and I feel very grateful to have studied with all of those great teachers. And then there's a fascinating story, which I'd like to share also, because I had a great piano lip teacher, David Dubal, and after playing a rather unusual piece in class, we were talking about sort of rare Russian literature. So I played Dmitri Kovalevsky's Third Piano Sonata. So after playing that in class and then discussing and all that, he said, "Hey, I want you to come up and see me for a few moments afterwards." So I went up and saw him, and he said to me, "How would you like to play that sonata for Vladimir Horowitz?" And I said, "You've got to be kidding me." He said, "No, I'm totally serious." So then he proceeded to tell me, he said, "I'll call you later. I'm going to tell you specific instructions about where to meet, all of that." And so we went and played for the Maestro.
Unbelievable.
Quite something.
That is crazy. So were you nervous?
Oh, you better believe it.
Okay.
So I practiced like crazy, I mean, everybody there, at the school, they're practicing like crazy, but I think I did more probably leading up to that than I had ever previously done. And so, I wanted to be especially super prepared for that. And so Horowitz was a night owl. And so I had to meet Dubal on the corner of, 66th Street where Juilliard was and Broadway, or I shouldn't say was, where it is, Lincoln Center. And then we took a taxi to Madison and Fifth, and we got out there and, walked, and this was at midnight. And then, we stayed there till like 4 a.m.
Oh,
of course, Horowitz's wife was Toscanini's daughter, Wanda.
That's right. I remember that.
Yeah.
Gosh. Well, it's funny.
He invited me, and he was quite the gossiper. He talked about all the pianists like Courteau and Schnabel. He talked about their sex lives and some funny stories, and how he knew Rachmaninoff and how they ran through the Rachmaninoff Third Concerto in the basement of Steinway, the old Steinway in 57.
Oh my gosh.
And, and then at one point he leaned over after I played this piece for him, this Kovalevsky piece, and then he says, "Do you want me to show you how I practice octaves?" He was renowned for his incredible playing. I was like, "Yeah, of course I want you to show me how you do that." Then he leaned over me at one point from behind and put his pressure on top of my hands, his body weight, and he said, "That's the kind of depth into the keys that you should play with when you're playing in the concert hall. Not like you do in your living room, not like you do in a teacher's studio, but really, I mean, these kind of like really specific things that are so practical that you don't think about virtuosos of that stature having to think about, and then imparting that knowledge to a much younger student."
But that you must, like, every moment that you spent with him must be like burned into your mind.
Indeed.
I mean, indelible.
So what I would do, and then he was kind enough to invite me back like about 5 or 6 times after that, and then shortly after that is when he passed away. But anyway, what I would do is every time I came back to my apartment after I would go to those sessions, I would like speak into the tape recorder, and just so that I wouldn't forget all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is just so. Now I kind of knew a little bit about that in advance, but having you tell the whole story is just mind-boggling. When you have those kinds of experiences, even short ones. I had a couple like that myself. I had the opportunity to meet for a tea with Colin Davis, the British conductor, who was just amazing. Yeah, in Boston a couple of times, and he just said a few things that always stuck with me. Just things about conducting that I've never forgotten. And those kind of things are amazing. Well, that in and of itself is unbelievable. So you're still in New York City. What happened next?
Well, I came across another titan of the music world completely by chance. So the teacher, let's see, I was still in Gordnitzky's class. Yeah. So he said to me, you should enter this concerto competition that's coming up, because the school has concerto competition every semester, and you know, sometimes it's piano, sometimes it's violin, but whatever it is, each contestant that enters has to play the same work. So they decided to do something unusual that season, and they selected Gershwin. And so I had, you know, having studied with this Rudolf Serkin protege prior to Juilliard, my knowledge of pop music was pretty limited. I wasn't bringing any kind of Gershwin, any kind of pop tune. You know, I would listen to it, of course, on my own, but I wasn't allowed to study any of that or bring any in for my lessons. So it was a really unusual piece of Gershwin, the second Rhapsody, which he wrote in 1931 after Rhapsody in Blue, and sometimes known as the New York Rhapsody. And it's very similar to Rhapsody in Blue. I mean, it's quintessential Gershwin, but maybe with a slightly darker tinge to it, I would say. And so that was the work that was selected for, you know, the contestants. So, you know, I was told, this is going to be a piece that's right up your alley. You should enter this.
Right.
I was like, well, you know, I don't really know the work. So I said, well, I'm going to go to the Juilliard library. I'm going to pull out the score. I'm going to put earphones on and listen to a recording of it. So the recording that I found at the time was Oscar Levant and Morton Gould. And I think it was New York. And so anyway, so I listened to it and I was like, yeah, this is something I love, and I'd love to study it and love to learn it and enter it. So fast forward, I get into the finals of that. Bobby Short, you know, the famed jazz pianist and singer, he was I think he was part of the jury actually for that. And he came running up to me afterwards. He said, "Oh, you're such a master pianist, you know, real virtuoso." And it was really nice for somebody like that to say that. And then I ended up winning the whole thing. So I got to play in Lincoln Center with the Juilliard Orchestra, and then student conductor Andreas Delfs. And then we were doing that. And then the next morning, I was in class, and the dean of the school called the professor, and he said, have Tom Pandolfi come down to the dean's office. So I went down there, and he said, I got a call this morning, and this gentleman wants you to go over to his office because he was really impressed with your performance last evening. So he said, you got to go over to the ASCAP offices where this person is the president. And of course, speaking about Morton Gould, who was the guy first heard on the recording with Oscar Levant. And so I go over there, and he said some very, very flattering things, which it's a little embarrassing to repeat because they were so flattering.
Yeah, right.
And so I said, being a sort of a daring, very young kid at that point, I said, could you write that in my score? And he was like, so he wrote it in the score, and he said some very encouraging things, and encouraged me to play more and more Gershwin. And that's really kind of where the genesis of my love for Gershwin and the more pops genre began.
That's amazing that it happened like that. So it wasn't something.
And of course, nobody knew. I had no idea this man was in the audience, and it just was by chance, and it was a really nice experience.
And for those listeners and watchers who don't know anything about or are not familiar with Morton Gould, he was just an amazing American composer, educator, somebody who really went to bat for the rights of musicians and performers and composers, but wrote so many wonderful pieces that we perform on a regular basis, not just with the Pops, but are performed with orchestras. And just a remarkable person, also a great conductor who made lots of recordings with his own orchestra and other orchestras through the many decades. Yeah. Wow. That's pretty auspicious beginning, Tom.
So anyway, that was sort of my life at Juilliard. It was a fascinating experience, rubbing shoulders with some of these people, or walking down the hallway and seeing people like the pianist Abby Simon or Emmanuel Axe, or all of these
Right.
great artists. Peter Serkin.
That's amazing. Yeah. Wow. So what happened after graduation? What was the next step? Let me ask this before you answer that question. I was talking to another Juilliard grad recently, actually on the show, and we were talking about how so many people who attend Juilliard, they're told, okay, you are being groomed to have a major career as a concert artist, which isn't the way it always works.
Right.
Some people do, some people don't, especially if you're an instrumentalist that maybe plays an orchestral instrument. You're not necessarily groomed for a career as an orchestral musician. You're more groomed for a career as a soloist. Now, as a pianist, it's a little bit different, but you probably weren't necessarily groomed for a career as a teacher or as a chamber music person.
No.
So luckily, what you ended up doing was really what you were trained to do.
Fortunately so, yes. I will say, to their credit, though, in graduate school there, we did, all the piano majors had to take piano pedagogy. So there was a little bit of, but it was more like the history of it, like being exposed to the various methods, not just the Suzuki method, the Dalcroze method, all these various kind of methodologies of method. But in addition to, and then we had to have a student, as part of the, as a prop, if you will,
That's right.
the class, and see how we would handle, certain situations should we be using various methods. But as far as like the actual art of how you become a teacher or how you secure a position as a professor, no, I can't say in those days. Now, maybe it's different now, but I can only speak, of course, from the time I was. And as far as all of this, the business end of it, the marketing end, and of course nowadays with the social media and all of that, I mean, that I don't know if you would agree with me about this, but from my perspective, I had to do a lot of self-learning. I mean, would you say that's true?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Right. And even more so in conducting school, because first of all, it's almost impossible to teach conducting.
Right.
I mean, you can teach, the little movements that conductors make, and you can talk about, how to learn a score, or you can talk about orchestration or counterpoint or something like that. But the only practical way to learn how to be a conductor is to get in front of an orchestra. So what they don't tell you is exactly what you're talking about, like how to get a job, how to market yourself, and how to work with people, or how to work with a board, or how to fundraise, any of that. No, we never heard anything about that. So
and actually, I think as a teacher, you not only have to have the knowledge, of course, of the repertoire of whatever instrument it is you're teaching, or you're trying to impart knowledge about, but it's also the idea of the tradition of what came before you. It's the idea of you have to be not just musician, but you have to be a little bit psychologist, you have to be a bit of counselor, you have to be musician and someone who's very practical, not just the music, the philosophical side, but a problem solver, really. Like, if a student asks you, well, how do you finger this, or why would you finger this in such a way, or how do you solve this problem? How do you feel when you go on stage? How do you sight read? Any of these kinds of things that are very practical. I mean, I think it involves various aspects, which for me, as I said, it was a lot of self-exploration and self-discovery.
Yes, that's exactly true. And so you were in New York. What happened after graduation, and how long did you actually stay in New York before you started working as a professional?
I left New York shortly after graduation, graduating the second time, because I did my undergraduate and graduate there. So I was there 6 years altogether. And then I went back to the Washington, D.C. area. And I never was one of these people that did the competition circuit, you know, I mean, I did some of the competitions, like I said, you know, the one there at school, and, you know, some of the more local things there. I did do some international competitions, which I was fortunate enough to be successful in, but I never did like the whole circuit like a lot of my colleagues did. I just didn't feel that that was for me. I was more interested in exploring a lot of the repertoire and sort of like not trying to become like an overnight sensation, because I felt for myself, I wanted more time to, you know, discover myself musically, have a slower and more steady growth path, which is not the most glamorous, but I thought for me, it worked a little bit better. It was a little more healthy, I would say.
Sure.
While albeit difficult, but I just think that was more satisfying in many ways for me.
And I think, you know, I can speak from my own experience with you. You have a real way of communicating with people that you'd want to work with that makes us want to work with you. And it's just your friendliness and your camaraderie and your mutual admiration and support, and also the fact that you know, you're really good at the marketing end of it. I remember when you were telling me about a great photo shoot you did, and I was so intrigued that I went and did something similar somewhere else. But you always had such great marketing materials, which is, you know, something not all artists figure out.
Well, I appreciate your saying that. Yeah, I mean, for me, like the first time I ever did a concerto, the first concerto I ever studied was a very early one of Mozart, K414, an A major one. And then of course I did the Mendelssohn G minor. I mean, these were all things that I did as a student, a very young student, you know, young, and Franck symphonic variations, and all these pieces that are very musically substantive, but they have beautiful parts. I mean, especially, you know, Mozart, I mean, this all, he experimented with the woodwinds, and, you know, everybody's got their little solo part. And from very early on, I always thought, wow, you know, when you hear that part, and you know, when I'm speaking, I was like 12, I don't know, 11, 12 years old. And the first time I heard that, I thought, wow, that part should shine. You know, it shouldn't be just about what the piano's doing. It's like that part is special there. So maybe drop back a little bit, and then you have this dialogue that's going on. So I try to be, I mean, at least even in the most virtuoso pieces, I think it should be all about that give and take and all about that dialogue that's going on. Just like you and I are having a dialogue right now, and the listeners are hearing what we're saying. I think it's all part of it.
And that's what makes you such a great collaborator. And I think one of the other things that's unique about your work is that you champion so many less well-known pieces by composers who maybe were not so well known, and then and not only classical pieces, but then branching into what we know through the pops world and what the pops audiences already know, commissioning some really amazing concerti that are based on popular music. So tell us a little bit about how about this relationship you have with Simon in London, and how that all developed and what came out of it that we know about already here.
At the outset, the way I first met Simon, Nick is speaking about this composer who's a good friend of mine, Simon Proctor, based in the London area in the UK, and he's a really fascinating composer, fascinating guy, really nice guy, and the way I first met him was I had a management company that was doing my European engagements at that point, and Simon was also a client of theirs. And so one of the managers there said, you know, Simon is looking for a pianist to premiere one of his pieces, and it's a real virtuoso work, and we think it would be very well suited to your temperament. And so I said, sure, have him send me the score. And, you know, I took a look at it, and I thought it was really innovative and really cool, actually. And that was my first introduction to Simon and something that you and I know well, the James Bond Concerto.
Which is an amazing piece.
It
I mean,
is.
it's just, you know, and people just love it. I mean, it's just like all these different themes. And I know as he went along, he kept adding, you know, when there was a
Well,
new Bond movie.
it's funny you bring that up because, you know, there's the new Bond film that's being released. He
Right.
just made a whole new set of parts, whole new score, and
Oh
he
my God.
inserted the latest one that's
Oh
in
my gosh.
yeah. So he's really kept up with that. And actually, you and I also did his Sinatra
Right.
concerto.
Yeah.
He's written a new one. He's written actually a few new ones. Something with melodies from Queen, the rock group Queen,
Mm-hmm.
and that coincided with that film that was out about a year ago or so, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
Then the let's see, Andrew Lloyd Webber, and then he's just sent me a score of Christmas Concerto,
Mm-hmm.
which you know has it's a big Christmas extravaganza.
Nice.
Yeah,
Sounds
and
like
then he
sounds
also
like fun
did
stuff for the future.
simultaneously with that,
Yeah.
a Hollywood one, which has all the big, you know, starts with the big MGM theme, you know, and then it goes through lots of the big movie hits, not only from the golden age, but some of the ones that are more current. So he really likes doing this, and I think it's very marketable. It's very accessible for the audience. It's fun for the pianist. I think fun for the musician,
Oh, yeah.
conductor, and
Yeah.
it's a blast, really. I like it.
Yeah.
I enjoy it. And then, of course, you and I have done the Leroy Anderson Concerto.
Yeah, another really great piece, which is not that well known, but
that much.
Yeah, and we started out doing more traditional classical repertory with many different orchestras all over the place, and so one experience in particular that you got me hooked up on, we'll talk about because you were drinking your Moldovan brandy earlier.
Yeah, I think another sip.
Yeah, there you go. Have another sip. Was the opportunity that you helped me get, which was to conduct in Moldova, and that was quite a trip. But you actually you had been there prior. And what were, I mean, Moldova is a very interesting place, I will say.
Very.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's landlocked and it's right next to Romania, and you have people there that, especially when I went and probably when you went, the younger people are speaking their ancient language, which is sort of like Romanian, and then the older people who were part of the whole Soviet occupation are speaking Russian.
Right.
And there was a real tension between the two. Because the young were looked at as being very progressive, and the older people were very, very, still ensconced in this whole Soviet era thing. What were some of your, observations when you were over there?
Well, yes, definitely some of that, for sure. What was fascinating to me was their embracing of American culture and American music.
Mm-hmm.
And so every time I have ever gone, I think only one time I did a Rachmaninoff concerto. It was either Rachmaninoff or Tchaikovsky, I think. But every other time has always been American music. And they really flocked out. I mean, I don't know if you had that experience there when you were there, but there were so many people that would show up at a kind of an unusual hour, like 6 p.m., which is more of our dinner hour here, right?
Yeah.
So they would be showing up there, and so many people would come. They would be, lining down the pathways of the hall, really, not even seated, and standing. And so, and of course, showing lots of admiration for not only and respect for American artists, but for the music itself that we were sharing with them. So I enjoyed it.
I agree. I mean, and in my case, when I went, they wanted me to do music from Star Wars. And so we did it. I think it was the orchestral premiere of Star Wars music, because I brought over these real John Williams parts that we did, and the people went nuts. I mean, they went crazy. Yeah. And they were like you say, they were in the aisles, no fire laws there or anything like that. Although speaking of fire, didn't you say the hall burned down recently?
It did. Not the one in Tiraspol, but the one in Kishinev. They, I think it happened within the last week and a half or so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So yeah, I was seeing postings on Facebook about that. But anyway, yeah. What's interesting is when you go into a restaurant there, or you go into a bar, or you even get into a taxi, and you hear this music that was popular here, let's say in the 80s, 90s, and
Right.
they're hearing it for the first time. It's like they get everything by delay,
Yeah, right.
And they're jamming to the stuff that was popular here, like several decades ago. It's kind of funny, but they embrace that, and it's the same with the Star Wars. Like that was maybe the first time they.
Well, this is the thing that was funny about it, was that when I would go out and walk around the Capitol, and they were starting to have these bootleg copies of Star Wars movies, and I'm talking about 4, 5, and 6, the first 3. And this was, in it was probably late 90s, early 2000s, 20 years after or more after they came out. And it was the first time. So these people were seeing this stuff for the first time. So we were thrilled to hear this music.
Exactly.
So, I mean, what a great experience, though. And thank you for helping me to have that experience. It was something else.
Yeah. You're always such a wonderful conductor to work with. One of my favorite collaborators of all time is you, and they're very lucky to have you there in North Charleston. And I say this because it's like what you were saying about some people that you work with, and sometimes it's more about the ego, and sometimes there's the maestro for personality.
Oh yeah.
And you're so and you're all of that in the sense of your musicianship, but you're so down to earth and so easygoing to work with, and it's always really a great pleasure. And I mean,
well,
that's
thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate that from you, and we've just had so many great concerts. So much fun. So right now things are a little crazy.
They are.
And I hope we're coming out of it. As I mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast, we are going to start performing again, which is really exciting.
Yeah, but, congratulations on that. That is definitely a good move in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, thanks. But it's been hard, and especially I would guess for somebody like you, that you're used to performing and getting that reaction from an audience. That's what makes it fulfilling. It's one thing to perform a virtual concert. It's another thing to perform for an audience.
Yes.
So how has that all affected you during COVID?
It's been a major sort of psychological change, because the way you I just did my last set of concerts right before all this broke, in the early March. And then the week after that, I was supposed to go, start on a really quite extensive tour And then suddenly I was getting all of these texts and emails and, hearing from manager and all of that and saying, this is canceled or this is postponed, or maybe they can do it like a few weeks later. And then of course this got worse and worse and worse. And so basically the whole 1920 season, at least the tail end of it, is kind of transferred to hopefully what will be the new season.
Right.
In some cases, I even had some pushed out to 2022. But, then there was this whole mindset of first to having to accept that and then say, well, okay, now how are we going to move forward from that? And then the whole idea of doing the virtual things, I think any artist that I've spoken to, all of my colleagues, they all agree that recording itself is such a different experience than doing a live concert. I mean, I almost prefer to record live because it's very weird in a way to have your audience be just a set of microphones.
Yeah.
And you kind of get that. Now with a virtual concert or these live stream things, that people are listening. So it's obviously more than microphones. But, let's say you finish a really bombastic piece and then there's nothing, there's silence. Right. So you don't know how you don't, again, it's that whole idea of give and take, because even between the audience and the artists or the musicians on stage, there is still that give and take. And that's, I remember once I was doing one at the end of May, and it was the first time where people were starting to like sort of venture out a little bit more. And so I decided to have the doors open, so some of it would go outside and onto the street. And I remember I finished one thing and then I heard way in the distance, like about, I don't know, 5 or 6 people, and they were clapping. And that felt so good to hear it. Not in the sense that you need that, because I think, all of us are our own worst critics and we know are satisfied or not. But it's just the idea that you hope that you're reaching somebody. You hope you're touching somebody on some level through these amazing sounds that are transmitted. That's a language, of course, in and of itself. So that's one of the things that I missed the most. Now I'm doing, I'm trying to do more, as we all are, more social media presence, have much more of an online presence, do more, even like what we're doing right now, so we can stay in touch with our fans, stay in touch with the people that love our work, and just have everybody know that we're still there, we're still here, and we can't wait to perform for all of you again and share all of our musical ideas with you again.
That's a really good point, and that's exactly the way we feel here. And looking forward to doing that sometime really soon.
Yes.
Well, it's been so great to have collaborated over the years on so many things, from Brahms to Gershwin to James Bond. I mean, it's been a blast, and we will definitely be doing it again. Now you've given us some really good ideas for other projects that we could do in the future, which we will definitely do, because you do have a huge following here in North Charleston, people that really love your work. And
I love to hear that.
We're going to be dying to have you back here performing again.
Can't wait. I appreciate it, Nick.
So thank you so much, Tom Pandolfi, for being our guest on Happy Hour with the Maestro, and we wish you well in these difficult times, which are starting to get brighter. We wish you much success.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Nick. Take care.
Thank you, Tom.
All right. Bye-bye.
Great to be with you.
Same here.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Tom Pandolfi, we're thrilled to have him be with us for Happy Hour with the Maestro today. Again, I want to remind you of our concert coming up on November 7th at the North Charleston Performing Arts Center, featuring our new ensemble, the North Charleston POPS Brass. Again, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Maestro Wines, the Boeing Company and its associate, Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation, and the South Carolina Arts Commission. We'll look forward to seeing you next week, 5 o'clock. Thanks again. Bye-bye.